Coca-Cola is highly recognized as a symbol of American culture. The inventor was Dr. John Pemberton, a doctor in the 1800s. During the Civil War, he ditched his lab coat and enlisted in the army. After finding himself in the line of fire, he was given morphine so that he could manage the pain for his final few hours. Grab yourself a drink and let's talk about the history of Coca-Cola. Dr. John Pemberton was born in Knoxville in 1831 and grew up in Rome, Georgia. He obtained his practice license at the age of 19 with domestic medication. It was well recognized to apply the ideas of herbalism and botany to cleanse the body of dangerous poisons. It wasn't respected at the time, and many people had doubts about the approach. However, John nevertheless opened a company that focuses on materia medica, substances that were blended to create medicines. Several years later, John went after a larger traditional approach and obtained a pharmacy graduate degree. Shortly, he had to give up his white lab coat for a button-down outfit. John was in the midst of the raging Civil War and he was made the first lieutenant. 3 years into the fight, he was entangled in an open field of fire and was slashed by a saber. His physicians believed he wouldn't survive and gave him the use of morphine to reduce pain during his final time. But he disproved their claims and amazingly survived. John fought for a better life once the Civil War's haze dissipated. He relocated his family to Atlanta and attained senior status at one of the most prominent pharmaceutical companies. But little did they know, after his near-death experience, he developed a morphine addiction with no cure in sight for his daily habit at the time. He looked for a herbal treatment. He heard about Vin Mariani. It was claimed to treat any ailment because it contained red wine and ground-up cola leaves. It inspired John to create his own version to cure his addiction. Using cola nuts, red wine, and coca leaves, he developed what he labeled Pemberton's French wine coca. Coca leaves have been known to have a stimulant in pain, fatigue, and hunger suppression, whereas 0.35% of the plant is cocaine. It was reported by doctors and pharmacists that it was a potential treatment for morphine and opium addiction. John was confident that his French wine coca might not only treat addictions, but also anxiety, depression, and other illnesses like migraines. He helped other war veterans and set up a distribution network to market his treatment in his lab. The treatment was adopted right away. However, the demand alone wasn't sufficient to maintain the business. John was faced with a challenge that to change the direction of his new business, resulting in the development of Coca-Cola. The year Pemberton's French wine was released, Atlanta declared their intention to join states in the US that banned alcohol. Apprehensive that it would mark the end of his new remedy, John rushed to formulate his new medicine. He removed the liquor and substituted a synthetic for it, caffeine, followed by sweet lemon oil, vanilla extract, coriander, and orange nutmeg extracts. Subsequently, Frank Robinson, John's bookkeeper, proposed that he rename the company to Coca-Cola. However, he insisted that it be spelled with 2 C's for it to look more catchy. The first year of sales topped off at 50 with a sunken cost of 70 in supplies. John saw this as a defeat while Frank saw it differently. They did marketing through banners, store awnings, and streetcar placards. John was persuaded by Frank that it was a risk worth pursuing. Because of that, Coca-Cola became popular in Atlanta. John's condition deteriorated as Coca-Cola sales increased. He relapsed after receiving a stomach cancer diagnosis in an effort to feel better. Afraid that he wouldn't have enough money for his family and his addiction, he took the challenge choice to sell the company's stock. But that doesn't mean he didn't have high hopes for Coca-Cola. He knew it would become a popular beverage and reserve a third of his shares for his son Charles. Charles was in charge of manufacturing, but also developed a morphine addiction. Frank was concerned that Coca-Cola wouldn't have somebody to guide John's plan to expand nationwide. He therefore assumed the duty of locating the ideal investor while John remained bedridden. He then met an entrepreneur named Asa Griggs Candler. Asa said to Frank that Coca-Cola wasn't a viable endeavor, but Frank knew better. One day, when the two were outside, Frank stated, pointing to a wagon, Asa bought the rights to Coca-Cola's name and formula. He also thought of a wonderful idea. It was the first time in history that a business distributed what is now known as coupons for free samples. He distributed tiny slips of paper that could be exchanged for a glass of Coca-Cola at soda fountains. John's vision for Coca-Cola was crucial in inspiring confidence in his staff. 2 years following Asa's start to expand the business, he gave in to his addiction and passed away. As Charles's addiction got worse, Asa took over and started the Coca-Cola Company. He sold to every state in the United States, then to Canada, but he failed to build Europe's demand. Two attorneys named Joseph Whitehead and Benjamin Thomas came into Asa's office. Coca-Cola is already a prosperous company in fountain beverages. They proposed putting Coca-Cola inside bottles so that people can take the drink home. Asa thought it was an insane idea at first because bottling was expensive. Eventually, Benjamin and Joseph discovered additional sources of funding for the Coca-Cola bottling operation, which was one of the first franchising businesses in America. Joseph and Benjamin's so-called silly idea inspired Coca-Cola's iconic packaging and paved the way for its continued success. Coca-Cola created its own bottle after a year. Asa left the business after being elected mayor of Atlanta, and 3 years later, he turned the business off to his kids. It was then sold for $25 million. One of the financiers was Ernest Woodruff, a banker, was the one who brought the business public. In the year simplified Coca manufacturing cola's procedure and ensured that quality was maintained not long after he resigned. He convinced his son Robert to lead the company. Robert wired his way up from being a truck salesman to being a general manager for Coca-Cola. They established a connection with numerous historical and festive occasions. After the US, a 1928 Olympic squad made their way to Amsterdam during the Olympics and they distributed 40,000 bottles. They also created the demand for Coca-Cola in Europe. The company advertised and sold the beverage as a refreshing drink. Some bottles were green to resemble champagne bottles to attract customers. It's now one of the world's most recognizable brands, served in more than 200 countries. Before Robert retired from Coca-Cola, he kept a motivational paperweight on his desk.